Good morning. Today's lecture is going to be either very short or very long. I'm not quite sure how I want to do this. I think that I'm going to do two lectures because what I want to say about Teddy Roosevelt and his family does take so long. And I don't want you to get out of this class without hearing about the Roosevelts and their extraordinary family. Um, and I just think he's one of the most fascinating figures in American history. But we've skipped quite a bit over coming from Lucy Hayes to Ida McKinley, about whom I want to speak today. Ida McKinley is important, I think, for a lot of reasons, not the least of which it is her home in Canton, Ohio, that has been transformed into part of the museum for the First Lady's exhibits. And it is a wonderful place if you can get a chance to go up. Canton is a very interesting, large northern city. And I was surprised when we went there how sweet the tea was at McDonald's. Very pleased. But if you go, make sure that you take precautions and that you're safe there. But I would recommend that as a great trip with your family if you can do that to Canton, Ohio. I want to talk just a little bit about McKinley, and then move into the life of Ida and what they had together as a married couple and as First Lady and President of the United States. McKinley was what you and I have talked about in some of our classes. He was a doorway figure, one who has one foot in one generation and one foot in another generation. And as a president, he's fascinating to lecture on in class because of that sort of split personality that he had. He came up out of another Civil War military figure. He was educated, well respected, part of that Ohio group. He had some ties to the old Republicans, I think, who weren't particularly concerned with reform. Yet, when McKinley is president, there is a new political movement we call progressivism. Please do not equate that in any way with the current shanghaied usage of the term progressivism, because the liberals today understand the fearful nature of the label liberal, and so they try to hide behind some of these euphemisms that's been going on for years, and they're progressive, which really means today socialist. But in the context of the turn of the century, going from the 1800s to the 1900s, from the 19th century to the 20th century, progressivism had a completely different application. And it implied a true interest in spreading American wealth and culture and religion to those nations that did not have it. In establishing American presence in other places, we I think expanded the Monroe Doctrine mentality a little bit, and it also had to do with government helping to protect the health and just the everyday quality of life of American citizens. And that wasn't like New York City limiting the amount of Coke ounces that you could buy at a 7-Eleven, but rather it represented ideas such as meatpacking houses inspections and limiting work hours for children and for women, which was seen as so forward thinking then. Women would be insulted now, but it was, and it changed, it limited it, I think, cut back significantly on infant mortality rates, on lifespan, on the health of the food that was purchased. So I'm sorry to get so far afield, but McKinley had some personality traits as a politician that went back to the old sort of Gilded Age Republicans, and yet he was also moved in towards the progressive age as well. And he's a doorway figure. And what an appropriate place for him, as he had one foot in the 19th century and one in the 20th. And in his second term, when he's reelected to office in 1900, and note again that's 20-year, he's going to be a victim of the 20-year curse and die in office, he selected for himself Teddy Roosevelt as his vice president. And I think they thought that if they put Teddy Roosevelt in that position, that he couldn't cause any more trouble. So that's for next lecture. But McKinley is a likable, I think, very successful president who navigated the nation with some grace into the new century. And he had by his side his lovely wife, Ida Saxton McKinley. Ida was born on June 8, 1847 in Canton, Ohio. And she is married to William McKinley in 1843. Now, one thing that's interesting to me about Ida is not only did she have a good education, but she worked for her father in a bank, and she also will actually rise to a position of management in the bank. And that was very unheard of for women in her day. And I think that owes a lot, not just to the fact that she's her father's daughter, but the fact that she had what it took to do this. It had to be a tremendous, I don't know, I don't want to say burden, but a tremendous step forward to take on that kind of role as a woman in American culture at that time. So Ida is no wallflower. She's intelligent. She has a strong personality, but I wouldn't call her overbearing. And I don't in any way see that she was, it's very difficult. I will tell you right now, it's very difficult to find positive information about Ida. When I took the tour of the home, you have the museum is next to her home, and then her home is part of the tour itself, and part of the museum itself. And when you go in and you hear this presentation on her, she is maligned, and she's seen as, holding Will back, and that's just not true. And from the historical record, but because you know she was an invalid, and we'll talk about that in a second. By the time she's first lady, she was an invalid, and every day when he left the White House, he would turn back and look at the window of her bedroom, and when he would see her waving a handkerchief, and he would wave back at her. It's their way of their romantic goodbye. But her detractors see that as, well, she's holding him back. She's keeping him, tied to her. And I don't see that at all. So if you do some research on her, it's very difficult, I think, to find positive comments about her in terms of her role as First Lady. They had some very difficult times in their marriage, and I misspoke. I want to apologize to you. They were not married in 1843. I knew that didn't sound right. They were married in 1871. I don't know what in the world I'm thinking. 1871. I knew that was wrong. So they had some very difficult times in their marriage. She was very close to her mother, and her mother passes away. They have 2 children, 2 daughters, and the daughters die. One year it's 1872. 1873, and another in 1875. So she deals with the death of her mother in 72, the death of her infant daughter in 73, and then a toddler daughter in 75. And they had no more children. I don't know if there were any miscarriages, but there were no more children in the record there for them. And as a result of the grief, Ida had always suffered from headaches. We might today think of them as migraines, but she suffered from debilitating headaches. And these headaches, after this period of protracted grief, these headaches that would lead to seizures, epileptic seizures. And even at this late date on American history, epilepsy was unknown, and no one knew how to deal with it. You and I talked about that in terms of Elizabeth Monroe. But Ida is quite different from Elizabeth in that she continued to try to do her hostess duties the best she could. And she would sit next to, at state dinners and formal occasions, she would sit next to her husband, which was not considered the thing to do. You usually would sit, with someone else, and you've seen that. You've seen how that's done. You sit with someone else that you're not married to, or that with whom you did not arrive. But she would sit next to him, and probably for this purpose. If she had a seizure or would start to have a seizure, now you're going to think this is very strange, but this was the protocol of the day. He would take a handkerchief and place it gently over her face and sort of hold her up. I don't know if she had the grand mal seizures where she would fall on the floor. Eventually, she did faint a lot, which could have been part of the epilepsy, but he would wait for it to pass, and if it didn't look like it would pass, he, with the aid of someone else, would take her gently out of the room and resume the dinner. And I just think that's a marvelous way the two of them worked to cope through this illness. And I think that far from dragging him down and holding him back, that she, in fact, bolstered his self-confidence, provided a loving atmosphere at home, and in every way supported him within the limits of her physical disabilities. So you have to examine, if you're interested in Mrs. McKinley, see what else is out there, see what if you can find some materials on her. And sometimes the best way to find out, and this is something we've talked about in our classes, and I'm going to have to address it again this semester. If you want to write a paper on Ida McKinley, you might not be able to go up to our library and find 5 books on Ida McKinley. So what would you do? You would find a book on William McKinley, or maybe even a book on Teddy Roosevelt, or a book on American history at that age, and see what little bits and pieces. If you have a book on William McKinley and there's some things about Ida, look in the back of the book, look in the index, look in the bibliography, and see what other sources are out there. And that's just a really shortcut and easy way to find some sources when they don't seem to be readily available. So if at any point in your research you find that you want to do something else on Ida, then you can certainly do that. Well, unfortunately, the McKinley's happy marriage is going to come to a terrible and tragic end in 1901 at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, when on September 6th of that year, our beloved McKinley was shot by an anarchist, Leon Solzhenitsyn. And that's another dramatic story. And I guess that's probably where we will end today, is with this lecture, rather, because if I go into the Roosevelts, then I will have another hour here to go. But with that, with the death of McKinley, you have the, I don't want to say succession, but you have TR, who will then become president, and not everyone was particularly happy about that. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Ida will live on until May of 1907, and she lived in the home that they had hoped to retire to and live together there after he completed his second term. And I'm just so sorry that this did not work out for them. Just a little bit of detail about the assassination. This man, Leon Solzhenitsyn, walked up to McKinley, and McKinley was going to shake his hand. The man pushed on McKinley's chest with his left hand, pulled out a gun that he had hidden under a handkerchief, and then he fired 2 shots at the president at close range. One bullet ricocheted off a button, and the other went into the president's abdomen, and it hit his stomach and went on through his colon, nicked a kidney before it stopped in the back. And McKinley lived on for a week, and some sources will tell you that he probably suffered as much from the treatment that he received as from the injury. And Ida stayed by his side without the hysterics that we saw from Mrs. Lincoln. And our beloved president said, "Goodbye, all, goodbye. It's God's will. It will be done." And so that reassures me more about his character even than anything else on the record, is that he he seems to have had a saving relationship with Christ. And never underestimate the value of the freedom that we have in being able to say those kind of things and make those kind of valuations. That always thrills my soul when I see evidence of that. And as I say, our beloved Ida will live on until 1907, and sadly, she did not have children to take care of her, but there are family members that will take care of her. If you get a chance, please go to the house and see that. And if somebody is negative about Ida, just tune them out. Better yet, say, there's maybe more to the story than you're saying here. So anyway, we'll be back with you very shortly with the look at the Roosevelts. And in that, I'm going to talk as much about their family as I am about his first and second wives. All right. Well, thank you for your good attention.